When I first got the job at Little Oaks Daycare, I thought it was a dream come true. I had always loved working with kids, and after years of studying early childhood education, I was finally stepping into a full-time role where I could make a difference. The place seemed perfect. Colorful walls, cheerful giggles echoing through the halls, and a staff that at first glance appeared welcoming, but the moment I met Karen Mitchell, I realized my dream job was about to turn into something else entirely. Karen had been working at Little Oaks for over a decade. She was in her early 40s with a sharp, scrutinizing gaze and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. On my first day, she seemed friendly enough. "Oh, you must be Emily. Welcome to the madhouse," she said with a laugh, but something about her tone made it clear she wasn't joking. She walked me through the rooms, pointing out where the supplies were, which kids were the troublemakers, and which parents were the most demanding. "You'll learn quickly," she added, giving me a pat on the back that felt more like a warning than encouragement. At first, I brushed off the uneasy feeling she gave me. Maybe she was just direct, the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat things. But it didn't take long for me to notice the way she treated me compared to everyone else. I was given the toughest shifts, left alone with too many kids while she took long breaks in the staff lounge. She constantly corrected me in front of parents, making it seem like I didn't know what I was doing. "Emily, remember, we don't let the kids use those markers," she'd say loudly, even though no one had ever told me about that rule. "Emily, you need to be more attentive," she'd add, when a toddler tripped over their own feet, as if I had the power to stop gravity itself. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe she was just tough on new hires. But then I started hearing whispers. "Karen really doesn't like you," one of my coworkers, Sarah, told me one afternoon when we were cleaning up after snack time. "She says you're not cut out for this job." I froze. "She said that?" Sarah nodded. "She tells the other staff that you're lazy, that you don't follow the rules. I don't believe it, but she's been here forever. People listen to her." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction with Karen, wondering what I had done to make her target me. But the truth was, I hadn't done anything. She had decided from day one that she didn't like me, and now she was making sure everyone else felt the same way. The worst part was how sneaky she was about it. She never outright yelled at me or did anything that could get her in trouble. Instead, she set me up to fail. She conveniently forgot to tell me about schedule changes, leaving me scrambling to cover shifts. She told parents I was still learning, making them wary of trusting me with their kids. One day, she even went so far as to move the cleaning supplies to a different cabinet and then loudly accuse me of not doing my job properly when I couldn't find them. But the moment I realized just how far she was willing to go was when a parent pulled me aside one morning. "Emily, can I talk to you for a second?" Mrs. Lawson, the mother of one of my favorite little girls, had a concerned look on her face. "I just wanted to check. Are you okay? Karen mentioned you've been struggling with managing the kids." I felt my stomach drop. "She said that?" Mrs. Lawson hesitated before nodding. "I didn't think it sounded like you, but I wanted to ask. My daughter loves you. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." I forced a smile, assuring her that everything was fine, but inside I was fuming. Karen wasn't just making my job harder. She was actively trying to destroy my reputation. And the worst part? It was working. The director, Mrs. Thompson, started watching me more closely, questioning me about things I hadn't even done wrong. My coworkers grew distant, unsure whether to believe me or the woman who had been there for years. That was the moment I knew. If I didn't do something, Karen was going to push me out. She wanted me gone, and she was playing the long game to make sure it happened. But if she thought I was just going to sit back and take it, she was wrong. She had no idea who she was messing with. Every morning, I walked into Little Oaks with a forced smile, knowing Karen would find a new way to make my life difficult. It had become a daily routine. Her subtle sabotage, her whispers behind my back, her carefully calculated moves to make me look incompetent. And the worst part was that it was working. She started shifting more responsibilities onto me while taking credit for my work. If a parent praised how clean the playroom was, Karen would smile and say, "Oh, I spent some extra time tidying up yesterday." If a child learned something new, she'd take full credit. "I've been working so hard with them on that," she'd tell the parents, even though she'd barely spent any time with the kids that week. Meanwhile, I was drowning in extra tasks. Cleaning, organizing, supervising the most difficult children, it all landed on me. It wasn't just the workload that was exhausting, it was the way she manipulated everyone around us. She would accidentally forget to tell me when important changes were made. One day, the schedule had been updated and I was supposed to take the kids outside for playtime an hour earlier than usual. I had no idea. So when Mrs. Thompson walked in and saw the kids still inside, she frowned. "Emily, why aren't the children outside?" I blinked, completely caught off guard. "What? I didn't know." Karen, standing nearby, sighed dramatically. "Oh no, I thought I mentioned it this morning. I must have been so busy I forgot." Mrs. Thompson gave me a disapproving look, then turned to Karen. "Make sure Emily stays on top of the schedule, please." That was how it always went. Karen never did anything big enough to get in trouble, just enough to make me look irresponsible. Then came the worst day yet. It started like any other. I arrived early, prepped the classroom, and braced myself for whatever Karen had planned. By mid-morning, everything seemed fine. The kids were playing, and I was setting up an art activity when I noticed Karen talking to a few parents in the hallway. I didn't think much of it until I heard my name. "She's sweet, but still very inexperienced," Karen said in a hushed voice, just loud enough for me to catch. "She's struggling a bit with keeping the kids under control, but I'm trying to help her. Hopefully she improves soon." One of the mothers glanced at me through the doorway, then back at Karen. "Oh, should we be concerned?" "I wouldn't say that," Karen replied, lowering her voice just enough that I could barely make out the words. "Just keep an eye on things." My hands clenched around the glue stick I had been holding. She wasn't just making me look bad to my coworkers. She was planting doubts in the parents' minds. If enough of them started complaining, Mrs. Thompson wouldn't hesitate to fire me. I tried to confront Karen later that day. "Why are you telling parents I'm struggling?" I demanded, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. She gave me an innocent look. "I didn't say anything bad. Parents just like to be reassured, and I was letting them know we're working together to make sure everything runs smoothly." I knew exactly what she was doing. She was acting like my mentor, pretending to help while making sure everyone saw me as the problem. The next morning, I found my name missing from the weekly duty board. Every other teacher had their responsibilities listed: who was in charge of circle time, who handled snacks, who supervised nap time. But next to my name, no. "Karen," I called out, keeping my tone calm even though my pulse was racing, "why isn't my name on the board?" "Oh," she said, barely glancing at me. "Mrs. Thompson and I decided it might be best if you just floated for a while. Help out where needed instead of taking on specific tasks." I stared at her. "So, I don't have any assigned responsibilities?" She smiled. "It's just temporary. We don't want you feeling overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? That was rich, coming from the person who had been dumping all the work on me. She was slowly erasing me, making it look like I wasn't capable of handling a full workload. I tried to talk to Mrs. Thompson, but she brushed me off. "Karen has more experience, Emily. If she thinks this is best, I trust her judgment." Sarah was the only one who still believed me. "She's setting you up," she whispered while we cleaned up after lunch. "If you don't have an official role, she can make it look like you're not doing anything. And if parents start complaining, well..." I knew what she meant. Karen was making sure that when the time came, no one would question why I was being let go. She had been in this place for over a decade. She had the trust of the director, the parents, and most of the staff, and I was just some young, replaceable employee who, in their eyes, wasn't fitting in. But if Karen thought I was just going to sit back and let her win, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her push me out of this job. I was going to fight back. I stopped playing nice. If Karen wanted to make me look incompetent, I was going to make sure she didn't have the chance. From that day on, I started documenting everything. Every time she forgot to tell me something important, I wrote it down. Every time she made a passive-aggressive comment in front of a parent, I noted the exact words. If she moved supplies, switched schedules, or left me with an impossible workload, I recorded it. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with all of it yet, but I knew I needed proof. Sarah helped whenever she could. She started keeping an eye on Karen's behavior too, backing me up when I questioned something. "She's getting bolder," she whispered to me one afternoon while we set up for nap time. she thinks she's untouchable. And honestly, why wouldn't she? She had spent years building her reputation here. She had Mrs. Thompson wrapped around her finger. She had the trust of the parents. No one questioned her, because she had always been the reliable one. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized just how much Karen had been manipulating everyone, not just me. It was a conversation Sarah overheard that finally confirmed everything. I was cleaning up after lunch when she rushed into the classroom, her face pale. "Emily," she hissed, glancing toward the hallway before pulling me aside. "I just heard something. You're not going to believe this." I put down the stack of plates I had been holding. "What?" Sarah looked around again, as if making sure no one else was listening. Karen was talking to Lisa and some of the other staff in the lounge. She said she's just waiting for you to mess up badly enough so she can convince Mrs. Thompson to fire you. My stomach clenched. She actually said that? She said she's been trying to make you look bad, but it's taking longer than she thought. Sarah exhaled sharply. She also mentioned something about a friend of hers looking for a job. I think she's trying to push you out so she can get someone else hired. I had suspected Karen wanted me gone, but hearing it confirmed like this made my hands shake with anger. She wasn't just some petty coworker who didn't like me. She was actively working to ruin my career. That night, I stayed up going through everything I had written down. I had dates, times, specific incidents. I even had a few text messages where she had forgotten to pass on important information, only to later claim she had told me in person. It was all small things on their own, but together, it painted a clear picture. But I needed more. So I started being extra careful. I made sure to ask her questions in front of other people so she couldn't lie about giving me instructions. I repeated things back to her in front of witnesses. "Just to be clear, you're saying the schedule hasn't changed for tomorrow?" I'd ask, watching her closely. More than once, I caught her hesitating, realizing she wouldn't be able to change the story later. And then came the day she made her biggest mistake. It was a Friday afternoon, and the daycare had a special event planned, a little performance for the parents where the kids would sing songs they had been practicing. I had been working with the children on this for weeks. I had coordinated their little costumes, practiced with them every day, and even talked to the parents about bringing in snacks for after the show. It was a big deal, and I was proud of how excited the kids were. But Karen had other plans. When I arrived that morning, the schedule had been changed. My name was missing from the event entirely. Instead, Karen had taken credit for organizing everything. She said, "You seemed stressed," one of the other teachers told me when I asked what had happened. She said it'd be better if she handled it instead. I saw red. I had done all the work, and now Karen was swooping in at the last second to take the recognition. Worse, she was telling everyone she had made this decision because I couldn't handle the pressure. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I went straight to Mrs. Thompson's office. I had been avoiding going to her before, knowing she was on Karen's side, but this was too much. I knocked on the door and took a deep breath as I stepped inside. "Emily," she said, barely looking up from her paperwork, "can we make this quick? I have a lot to do before the parents arrive." I placed a folder on her desk. "I need to talk to you about Karen." She sighed. "Emily, if this is about..." "Just look at this first," I cut in, my voice steady. "Then you can decide whether or not you still think Karen is just looking out for me." Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then opened the folder. Inside was everything I had documented, pages and pages of incidents, the forgotten instructions, the changed schedules, the lies, the text messages, the names of parents who had mentioned concerns about what Karen had been saying, and at the very end, a signed statement from Sarah, confirming what she had overheard in the lounge. I watched as Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from impatience to disbelief and finally to something I hadn't seen before: concern. She flipped through the pages, pausing at certain points, her mouth tightening. By the time she reached the last page, she looked up at me with something close to regret. "Why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me," I said simply. Mrs. Thompson exhaled and closed the folder. "I need to think about this." I knew that was the best I was going to get for now, but as I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't expect things to change overnight, but I had planted the seed. Mrs. Thompson had seen the truth, and for the first time, Karen wasn't untouchable. but that didn't mean she was going down without a fight. For the next few days, she seemed oblivious to the fact that I had gone to Mrs. Thompson. She was still walking around like she owned the place, still giving me condescending smiles and acting as if she were in charge. If anything, she seemed even more confident, as if she had already won. At first, I thought maybe Mrs. Thompson hadn't done anything with the information I gave her, that she had looked through all of it and decided to brush it aside. But then I noticed the way she was watching Karen more closely. Karen must have noticed too, because she started getting careless. It started with little things. A few days after I spoke with Mrs. Thompson, Karen slipped up during morning check-in. She was supposed to log which children had arrived and mark any absences, something she had always been meticulous about. But that morning, when Mrs. Thompson did her routine check of the attendance sheet, she frowned. "Karen, you marked Liam as absent," she said, glancing toward the boy who was happily playing with blocks. Karen blinked. "Oh, I must have made a mistake." Mrs. Thompson didn't say anything, but I saw the way her expression tightened. Karen never made mistakes like that, not until now. A few days later, she forgot to remind a parent about an allergy restriction, something she always claimed to be extra careful about. When a mother showed up with a snack that one of the kids couldn't have, Mrs. Thompson had to step in. "Karen, why didn't you send out the reminder like you always do?" Karen hesitated for just a second too long. I guess I must have forgotten. That was the moment I realized something. She wasn't used to being watched. She had spent so long manipulating things from the shadows, twisting situations to her advantage without anyone questioning her, that now, under scrutiny, she was cracking. And then she made her biggest mistake yet. It was a Friday afternoon, right before the weekend. The kids were finishing up snack time and I was getting ready to take them outside, when Karen pulled me aside. "I need you to stay inside and clean up," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. I frowned. "But I'm supposed to take them out. That's what's on the schedule." "I'll take them out," she said. "You clean up." Something about her tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't the first time she had tried to push the less desirable tasks onto me, but there was something different this time. "Fine," I said, keeping my expression neutral. She left with the kids and I started cleaning up. I was alone for about 10 minutes when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying outside. I dropped the rag I was holding and rushed to the window. My stomach dropped. One of the kids, Mia, was sitting on the ground, clutching her knee and sobbing. The other children stood around awkwardly, not sure what to do. But what made my blood run cold was Karen. She wasn't paying attention. She was standing off to the side, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that a child had just gotten hurt on her watch. Without thinking, I ran outside. "Mia, are you okay?" I knelt beside her, checking her knee. There was a scrape, but nothing too serious. I turned to Karen. "What happened?" Karen startled, shoving her phone into her pocket. "Oh, I didn't see." My jaw clenched. "You didn't see?" "I was watching them," she snapped, defensive now. She just fell. But she hadn't been watching, and she knew it. I scooped Mia up and carried her inside to clean up her knee. The moment I stepped through the door, Mrs. Thompson was there. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes flicking between me and the crying child in my arms. "Mia fell," I said, keeping my voice steady. Karen didn't notice. Mrs. Thompson's expression darkened. Karen walked in a second later, her face already flushed. "It wasn't a big deal," she said quickly. "Kids fall all the time." Mrs. Thompson didn't say anything, just looked at her. "In my office. Now." Karen stiffened. "I have two?" "Now," Mrs. Thompson repeated. Karen shot me a glare as she followed Mrs. Thompson down the hall. I didn't follow, but I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. Sarah appeared beside me. Did she just? I nodded. She messed up. Karen had been waiting for me to fail, but in the end, she had only exposed herself. I didn't know exactly what was being said in Mrs. Thompson's office, but I didn't need to. I had seen the look on her face when she realized Karen had been negligent. I had seen the way Karen's confidence wavered for the first time. And most importantly, I knew I had enough evidence to make sure this wasn't just a slap on the wrist. I spent the next hour keeping myself busy, but my ears stayed tuned to the hallway, waiting for Karen to come out of that office. When she finally did, her expression was unreadable. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just walked straight past me and out the front doors. That was the first moment I thought, maybe this is actually happening. Sarah appeared at my side, lowering her voice. She left. I nodded, still watching the door swing shut behind Karen. Yeah. Sarah hesitated, then whispered, Mrs. Thompson asked me to come to her office next. That made my stomach tighten. If she was calling Sarah in, it meant she was looking for confirmation. Karen must have tried to downplay everything, maybe even twist it in her favor. But Sarah had heard too much, seen too much. If she told the truth, this might actually be over. While Sarah was in the office, I went back to work, trying to focus. The kids still needed attention, and I wasn't about to let Karen's downfall distract me from what actually mattered. But when Sarah finally came back out, the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. He's done, she said simply. I exhaled, my entire body relaxing in a way I hadn't realized it needed to. Sarah nodded. Mrs. Thompson told her to leave early today and that she'll be making a final decision by Monday. But we both know what that means. I knew. Karen wasn't coming back. The weekend passed in a blur. I kept expecting a call, some last-minute twist, some way for Karen to weasel her way out of this. But when I walked into work on Monday morning, Mrs. Thompson was already waiting for me. Can you come to my office for a minute? She asked. I followed her in, my heart pounding, and sat across from her desk. She folded her hands together, studying me for a long moment. I owe you an apology, she finally said. I should have taken your concerns more seriously from the start. I wasn't sure what to say to that. After everything, hearing her admit it almost didn't feel real. I reviewed everything over the weekend, she continued. Not just what you gave me, but Karen's overall history here. There were other complaints in the past, ones I dismissed too quickly. That won't happen again. I swallowed. So, she's gone? Mrs. Thompson nodded. I called her this morning and informed her that her employment has been terminated, effective immediately. I should have felt relief, but the weight in my chest was still there. And what about me? I asked carefully. Mrs. Thompson sighed. You're a good teacher, Emily. You care about the kids, and you put up with more than you ever should have had to. I know Karen did a lot of damage, and I want to make that right. I frowned, not sure where she was going with this. I'd like to offer you a promotion, she said. Lead teacher for your group. Full-time, with a raise. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. You're serious? Completely. I leaned back, trying to process it. After everything Karen had done to try and push me out, after all the ways she had undermined me, I was the one who was staying. I was the one getting her position. I let out a slow breath. I'll take it. Mrs. Thompson smiled. Good, you start today. And just like that, it was over. When I walked into the daycare that Monday morning, everything felt different. It was the same building, the same classrooms, the same children running around, but the atmosphere had shifted. Karen was gone. Just knowing that was enough to make the air feel lighter, like a weight had been lifted from the entire place. Some of the staff already knew. Word had spread over the weekend, and I could tell by the way a few of them glanced at me, some with curiosity, others with cautious approval, that they were waiting to see what would happen next. I wasn't just some struggling new hire anymore. I was the lead teacher now. The position Karen had tried so hard to keep from me was officially mine. I made my way to my classroom, rolling my shoulders, trying to shake off the tension that still lingered from the last few weeks. I had won, but I wasn't stupid. I knew there would still be challenges ahead. Karen had spent years weaving herself into the foundation of this place, making herself indispensable. Now that she was gone, there would be cracks. Sarah caught up with me in the hallway, grinning. So, how does it feel? I raised an eyebrow. How does what feel? She nudged me with her elbow. Knowing that you're officially in charge now, that Karen's not here. I exhaled, leaning against the doorway of my classroom. Honestly, it still doesn't feel real. Oh, it's real, she said. Mrs. Thompson had a staff meeting this morning before you got here. She made the announcement. I blinked. Wait, what? Sarah laughed. Yep, she didn't sugarcoat it either. Just told everyone straight up that Karen was fired and that you're taking over. Said if anyone had a problem with it, they could come talk to her directly. That was surprising. I had expected Mrs. Thompson to be more careful, to try and ease people into the transition. But if she was being that direct, it meant she wasn't just covering her own mistakes, she was making it clear that she had chosen a side. Sarah leaned in. And guess what else? A couple of the parents already heard. They've been asking about you. My stomach twisted slightly. Asking what? If you're staying. If you're okay. If they should be worried, she smirked. I think they're relieved. That part did feel real. I had spent so much time worrying about Karen's influence, about the way she had tried to poison my reputation, that I hadn't really considered what would happen after she was gone. But now that I thought about it, the parents weren't blind. They had seen how I treated their kids. They had seen how much I cared, and no matter what Karen had tried to make them believe, they knew the truth. I nodded slowly. Good. The rest of the day was a blur of adjustments. I had to step into my new role immediately, coordinating activities, making sure the other teachers knew the schedule, handling the minor chaos that always came with working in a daycare. It was exhausting, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. No passive-aggressive remarks, no sudden rule changes, no whispered conversations in the hallway. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I finally had a moment to breathe. I was organizing some supplies when I felt someone step into the room. I turned, expecting Sarah or maybe Mrs. Thompson, but it wasn't either of them. It was Karen. For a split second, I thought I was imagining things. She wasn't supposed to be here. But no, there she was. Standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes burning with resentment. I straightened. What are you doing here? She scoffed. Relax. I'm just here to pick up my stuff. I didn't say anything, just watched as she walked across the room and opened one of the cabinets. She started pulling out a few things. Some books, a couple of personal decorations she had left behind. Her movements were stiff, jerky, like she was barely holding herself together. I leaned back against the counter. So, that's it? And she didn't look at me. What do you mean? You spent weeks trying to push me out, I said. And now you're just leaving? She slammed the cabinet shut and turned to face me. You think you won? She snapped. You think you're better than me? I met her glare without flinching. I don't have to think anything, Karen. You did this to yourself. She let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea how this place works. You think Mrs. Thompson actually cares about you? The second something goes wrong, she'll turn on you just like that. She snapped her fingers. Enjoy it while it lasts. I tilted my head. Is that why you spent all those years making sure no one could replace you? Because you were scared? Karen's jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something other than anger in her expression. Fear. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. You're young. You think this job is going to be easy now that I'm gone? Just wait. The parents will start expecting more from you. The staff will test you. And when you make a mistake, and you will make a mistake, no one's going to have your back. I could have argued with her. I could have told her that I wasn't afraid of the work, that I had already been doing it while she was too busy playing her little games. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't need to convince her of anything. I smiled. I guess we'll see. Karen stared at me for a long moment, her mouth pressing into a thin line. Then, without another word, she grabbed her things and walked out. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch to see if she hesitated at the door. I just turned back to my work because I had a job to do. Sarah appeared a few seconds later, peeking into the room. Was that? Yeah. She looked pissed. She was. Sarah grinned. Good. I shook my head, laughing under my breath. Come on, we've got work to do. And just like that, Karen was gone, for good. The first week without Karen felt almost surreal. I kept expecting to hear her voice cutting in with a passive-aggressive remark or to walk into a room and find something deliberately misplaced, but it never happened. The tension that had hung over the daycare like a storm cloud was gone, and for the first time since I had started working there, I could actually breathe. Of course, that didn't mean everything was suddenly perfect. Karen had been right about one thing. People were watching me. The other teachers, the parents, even Mrs. Thompson. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see if I would stumble. Maybe some of them still believed Karen's version of events, that I was inexperienced and incapable. Maybe some of them were just curious to see how I'd handle things now that I was in charge. Either way, I knew I couldn't afford to mess this up. So I threw myself into my work. I reorganized the classroom schedules, making sure no one was left scrambling because of last-minute changes. I introduced a new system for managing supplies so we'd never run out of essentials. I made an effort to check in with the other staff members, especially the ones who had been closest to Karen, making it clear that I wasn't here to hold grudges or create more drama. And slowly things started to shift. One morning, as I was setting up an art station, one of the older teachers, Lisa, approached me. She had always been one of Karen's supporters, or at least she had stayed silent while Karen made my life miserable. But now, she hesitated near my desk, looking almost uncertain. "I just wanted to say," she started, folding her arms, "that the way you handled last week, it was impressive." I raised an eyebrow. "Last week?" "The whole situation," she said vaguely. "I know Karen could be difficult, but I never really thought she'd cross the line like that. I guess I just didn't see it." I didn't say anything, just let her process her own words. Lisa cleared her throat. "Anyway, if you ever need help with anything, let me know." That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get, and honestly, it was enough. The real confirmation that things had changed came from the parents. One afternoon, Mrs. Lawson, the same woman who had once pulled me aside to ask if Karen's comments about me were true, stopped me in the hallway. "My daughter keeps talking about how much fun she's having in class," she said with a smile. "I just wanted to say thank you." I returned the smile. "That means a lot. She's a great kid." She nodded, then hesitated. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure what to believe before. Karen made it sound like you were struggling." I met her gaze evenly. "That was the idea." She sighed. "Well, I'm glad I trusted my gut instead of the rumors. You're doing a great job, Emily." That was the moment it really sank in. Karen had spent weeks trying to tear me down, trying to make everyone doubt me, and yet here I was, still standing, still doing my job, and finally getting the recognition I had earned. That evening, as I was locking up the classroom, Sarah leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "So, have you let it sink in yet?" I chuckled. "What, that I survived?" "That you did more than survive," she corrected. "You won." I glanced around the empty room, thinking about everything it had taken to get to this point. The frustration, the exhaustion, the self-doubt. But in the end, I hadn't let Karen break me. I turned back to Sarah, smiling. "Yeah, I guess I did."